300% tariffs, your farmers locked out of markets overnight, your beer and wine pulled from shelves, and your tech laws labeled illegal by the world's most powerful economy. Imagine being told you must surrender your dairy system, your culture, your energy rules, and your right to buy your own products or face economic punishment. Most countries would panic. Most would fold. But what if every threat actually exposed desperation? What if every demand revealed weakness instead of strength? What if saying no to everything wasn't reckless, but the most calculated power move in modern trade history? Because what you're about to hear isn't the story of a small country being bullied. It's the story of how 5 demands, 300% tariffs, and one underestimated response flipped the entire balance of North American power. There's an old rule in negotiations that never fails. When the other side shows you their demands, they're also showing you their weaknesses. And right now, Donald Trump has just handed Canada the strongest negotiating position in North American trade history without realizing it. 5 demands. That's what the United States put on the table. 5 things Trump wants Canada to surrender before agreeing to extend the most important trade agreement on the continent. Dairy, digital media, provincial alcohol rules, government procurement, energy policy. 5 demands designed to reshape the balance between the 2 largest trading partners in the world. Mark Carney looked at that list and said, no, not to 1, not to 2, to every single one. That isn't stubbornness, it's strategy. Because every demand Trump made reveals something Washington desperately needs from Canada. And Carney understands that better than anyone in Washington seems to. What the White House thought was pressure turned into a confession. The list didn't come from leaks or speculation. The United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer stood before Congress and laid it out openly. These are the conditions Canada must meet if Washington agrees to extend the agreement for another 16 years. Start with dairy. The United States wants expanded access to Canada's dairy market. Right now, American producers can ship limited volumes into Canada tariff-free. Anything above that quota gets hit with tariffs between 200 and nearly 300%. Greer called Canada's supply management system unfair and restrictive, arguing that it blocks American farmers from competing on equal footing. Carney's response came the very next day. Supply management is not on the table, period. He answered in French, deliberately signaling Quebec, where the dairy system supports tens of thousands of families and is politically untouchable. And this wasn't just rhetoric. Canada passed legislation in June that permanently locked in supply management. Not a promise, a law. The door isn't just closed, it's sealed. Next came digital media. Canada's online streaming act forces platforms like Netflix, Spotify, YouTube, and others to invest part of their Canadian revenue into domestic content. The Online News Act requires platforms to compensate Canadian publishers for using their material. Greer labeled both laws discriminatory against American tech companies, claiming they create barriers to U.S. digital services. Canada's position is simple. Without those laws, American platforms would overwhelm Canadian culture, journalism, and voices. The market is too lopsided. Carney has shown zero interest in touching either law because dismantling them would mean handing cultural sovereignty to Silicon Valley. That's not a trade, that's a surrender. Then came provincial alcohol bans. Several Canadian provinces banned American beer and wine in direct retaliation for Trump's tariffs. Ontario, British Columbia, and others joined. Greer wants those bans lifted as a condition of extending the agreement. Here's what Washington conveniently ignores. Those bans exist because the tariffs came first. Remove the tariffs and the bans disappear. But Greer is demanding Canada remove its countermeasures while the U.S. punishment remains. That's not negotiation. That's asking Canada to absorb damage without defending itself. Carney isn't doing that. The bans stay until the tariffs go. Fourth, government procurement. Greer criticized provincial policies that prioritize Canadian suppliers over American ones. Ontario, Quebec, British Columbia, buying domestic instead of foreign. Washington wants those rules changed. The hypocrisy here is staggering. The United States enforces Buy American rules across federal contracts, military procurement, infrastructure, steel, technology, energy. Demanding Canada stop buying Canadian while America keeps buying American isn't a trade complaint. It's leverage dressed up as fairness. And finally, energy. Greer raised claims that Alberta's grid favors in-province power over U.S. imports from Montana. Alberta's energy minister rejected the claim outright. But the bigger story runs in the opposite direction. The United States imports roughly 3.8 million barrels of Canadian oil every single day. Nearly a quarter of U.S. refinery feedstock comes from Canada. Gulf Coast refineries were designed specifically for Canadian heavy crude. New England depends on Canadian electricity to survive winter demand. This isn't dependency flowing south. It's mutual reliance, and Canada's share is irreplaceable. Now, here's the part most analysis completely misses. People assume that refusing all 5 demands weakens Canada, makes it look uncooperative, gives Trump justification to threaten withdrawal. But Carney isn't just saying no. He's saying no while holding the cards Washington needs most. Every demand reveals American pain. Trump wants dairy access because American farmers are struggling globally and need Canadian consumers. Trump wants digital rules changed because U.S. tech companies are losing billions under Canada's laws. Trump wants procurement rules altered because Canada is successfully keeping money inside its own economy. Trump wants energy concessions because the U.S. can't replace Canadian supply. Greer didn't publish a list of Canadian problems. He published a list of Canadian successes. And notice what's missing from the demands. Automobiles. That silence tells you everything. The North American auto industry is deeply integrated. Parts cross the border dozens of times before a vehicle is finished. Canadian plants build components for American trucks. American factories build engines for Canadian cars. Automakers told Congress the agreement is essential. The Detroit Three testified that it saves tens of billions through integration. Trump's own Section 232 tariffs already disrupted that system. Now, the same manufacturers are begging Washington not to let the agreement expire because without it, tariffs harden, supply chains fracture, and U.S. auto plants suffer first. Carney knows this. Auto manufacturing is Canada's quiet leverage. Then came the China move. Carney traveled to Beijing and negotiated what he called friendly nation tariff relief. Targeted deals on canola, electric vehicles, agricultural goods, not a free trade agreement, not a violation. Trump initially praised it, then abruptly reversed, threatening massive tariffs and accusing Canada of becoming a Chinese drop-off port. Carney responded immediately. No free trade deal, no violation, no trigger of the China clause. Canada's trade minister confirmed the details directly to Washington. Greer understood, but the real impact wasn't the crops. It was the signal. Canada has options. For the first time in decades, Canadian farmers, exporters, and industries are not locked into a single market, and every alternative route makes it easier for Canada to walk away from a bad deal. Starting in July, 3 paths exist: extend the agreement, withdraw, or trigger annual reviews until expiration in 2036. Most analysts assume Canada will fold because uncertainty is dangerous. That assumption belongs to the old Canada, the Canada that sent 3/4 of its exports south and had no backup. Carney's Canada is different. China offers agricultural alternatives. Europe is expanding. By Canadian policies redirect $70 billion domestically. Critical minerals give Canada leverage Washington didn't have 5 years ago. The United States needs those minerals to compete with China in clean energy and artificial intelligence. Uncertainty hurts American companies just as much as Canadian ones. Nearly 150 U.S. industry leaders told Congress the agreement must continue. Automakers, energy firms, steel producers, exporters, they're watching these demands and quietly hoping Canada doesn't actually refuse everything. But Canada did refuse everything. And that's why pressure will shift inward onto the Trump administration from American businesses who need stability. Before any of this went public, Carney went to Davos and delivered a speech that reframed the entire debate. He warned that middle powers must never accept economic subordination, that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. European leaders applauded. Journalists called it the most significant Canadian address in a generation. Trump's Treasury Secretary dismissed it as virtue signaling, missed the point entirely. The speech wasn't aimed at Washington. It was aimed at coalition building, at Europe, at the Indo-Pacific, at every country tired of being economically coerced. Trump later publicly withdrew an invitation for Carney to join a high-profile international initiative. The snub made headlines. Exactly the wrong move when you need a deal signed. Because every demand now looks like bullying. Every refusal looks like leadership. While Trump was posting, Carney was building trade routes, coalitions, domestic policy, energy leverage, auto alignment, provincial unity, five demands, five refusals, and a Canada less dependent on the United States than at any point in 50 years. Trump wanted Canada to bend. Carney said no to everything. And the upcoming trade review is shaping up to be the moment where Canada proves that saying no to the most powerful economy on earth isn't weakness, it's leverage.